We're going to continue our study on the book of Daniel. In our previous session, we began in chapter 8, and in that chapter we saw that Daniel had a vision, and in that vision he saw a ram and a goat. And we learned from the interpretation given by Gabriel the angel that the ram represented the kingdom of Medo-Persia, and the goat represented the kingdom of Greece. And while Daniel continued to watch that vision, he saw the male goat. And I think I told you last time, in some versions of the Bible, it clearly says a male goat, and in some it simply says goat. So I'm saying male goat because we know it represented a king by the name Alexander, and from history we know he's always referred to as Alexander the Great. And Daniel saw that when this male goat, or Alexander, becoming great, and then when he became very powerful, he was shattered, meaning he died. And if I remember correctly, he died at the age of 33. And then in place of Alexander, 4 prominent kings came up, and they divided the kingdom among themselves. So what we have now is, or what Daniel saw was, in place of the great Grecian kingdom, there was now 4 smaller kingdoms. Then Daniel saw another king coming up from one of those 4 kingdoms. That's in verse 9 of chapter 8. And I hope you have read chapter 8 at least once, so it will be easy for you if you have. And this king had a humble beginning. We know that from the description of the king. Daniel says he saw a little or a small horn. So that indicates he had a very humble beginning. But he grew in power. This is in verse 9 of chapter 8. He grew in power to the south, to the east, and towards the beautiful land. And Gabriel, while interpreting that vision, told Daniel that Alexander's kingdom would be divided into 4 separate kingdoms, and none of those kingdoms would have the same power or glory. And then from one of those 4 kingdoms, a king would arise. And the angel did not reveal the name of that future king. And therefore, we can consider some of the historical facts to find out the name of this particular king. So let's go to the history part now. No, history means the secular history. South would refer to Egypt under the Ptolemies, and east would refer to the Seleucid kingdom, that is Syria and Babylonia, and the beautiful land refers to the Holy Land. And I think I gave you this reference last time. It is in Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 6 and 15. Refer to Israel as the most beautiful land, or the glory of all lands. That is Ezekiel 20, 6 and 15. Now now we are focusing on, in our previous session we just talked about the kingdom of Medo-Persia and Greece, and the rest of the chapter is exclusively about this particular king who had a very small beginning, and he grew until he reached the host of the heavens. That is verse 10. Then he threw down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. In some versions of the Bible, it says he threw down some of the starry host instead of some of the host and some of the stars. So they make it one. And then Daniel tells us that this king set himself up to be as great as the prince of the host. That's verse 11. And then he took away the daily sacrifice meant for the prince of the host. He ruined the sanctuary, he desecrated or profaned it. So when it says he ruined the sanctuary, that's what it means. He did not, this king did not literally destroy the sanctuary, but he desecrated it or profaned it. And then we are told in verse 12 that God restrained the army of heaven from responding to this rebellion. And what we have in this 12th verse is that this king stopped the sacrifice, he threw the truth to the ground, and he's prospered in everything he did. So let's consider some more historical facts. A man by the name, and I have sent you the updated supplementary notes, and in that notes you have the names of all the people I'm going to refer to. I think I have given you enough details in written form so that you have reference when I'm speaking about this king. A man by the name Antiochus Epiphanes usurped a Seleucid throne from his nephew by the name Seleucus IV. In other words, Antiochus overthrew the son of his older brother and became the king. Now, some historians say that he imprisoned his own brother instead of nephew and became the king. And I have no way of knowing which one is more accurate, but all we know is that he usurped the authority of another king and he became the king. And then he invaded Egypt in 170 BC. Again, don't get hung up on the particular year. What we have is from different sources of history, so there may be variations in the year. And this particular king by the name Antiochus Epiphanes imposed cultural and religious uniformity on all his domain and brutally suppressed the Jewish worship in Jerusalem. Now, every historical record of Antiochus Epiphanes confirms this description of him, this description of what I said. Most scholars believe Daniel's vision of this small horn is completely fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes. In 168 BC, Antiochus sent a troop of 20,000 soldiers to Jerusalem on a Sabbath day. Now watch this. He sent his army of 20,000 soldiers to Jerusalem on a Sabbath day, and he erected an idol of Zeus and desecrated the altar by offering a swine. And this idol became known to the Jews as the abomination of desolation. And you will hear this particular phrase again in chapter 11 of Daniel, and also this is mentioned in Matthew chapter 24 verse 15. So you can compare Matthew 24 with this, and you will, and also with, in future we will be studying chapter 11, and then you will have a better understanding. Now, this particular incident is not same as the one we will be studying in the future in chapter 11, but this served as a type of a future abomination that will be set up in the Jerusalem sanctuary in the last days. If you remember our study of the end time events or the judgment or the final judgment, we talked about the abomination of desolation that will happen in the city of Jerusalem. That hasn't happened yet, but this particular incident that happened in the time of, or because of, or through Antiochus Epiphanes is a forerunner or a type of what would happen in the future. Then in verse 10, chapter 8, we read that he threw down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled on them. So let's look at the Bible look in the Bible and try to learn what is the term stars mean. The stars can be literal or the people of God. And you can write Jeremiah 33 verse 22 and Genesis 15:5 and Daniel chapter 12 verse 3 and also Philippians chapter 2 verse 15. And this will give you some idea about how the word star is used for people. Stars can also mean angels. And for a reference, you can write Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. The host can mean the army of Jehovah or army of God. And you can write Exodus 12:41 as a reference. And as I said, the star can be literal, meaning the stars of the sky, or it can refer to people. And here it has to refer to people, because a king cannot literally reach the heaven and disturb or harm the stars or pull them down. And he cannot touch the angels. We know a king cannot touch the angels, and he cannot literally touch the real stars of heaven. So it has to refer to people. Besides, while interpreting this vision, Gabriel said he will destroy powerful leaders and devastate the holy people. So it's more clear now. The reference or the term stars is used for people. And the term powerful people, now we are looking at verse 24, which is the interpretation given by Gabriel the angel. The term powerful people or mighty men in some versions of the Bible could refer to nobles and commanders of his own kingdom. His means Antiochus. His own kingdom who supported his rivals, because there were others who claimed their right to the throne. So those nobles or mighty men would mean that. And the holy people, the angel said powerful leaders and holy people, two different set of people. The term powerful people, I already told you, the term holy people probably refers to the believing Jews who refused to obey Antiochus and his Hellenization efforts, that he wanted to promote the Greek culture everywhere. And Antiochus tried to do that among the Jews. And the Jews did not agree to it, or they resisted. Therefore, holy people may refer to those who resisted Antiochus' Hellenization efforts. Now, I want to talk to you about the book of Maccabees. I don't know if you ever heard that term. There are two historical books included in the Roman Catholic canon of the Old Testament. In other words, if you go to the Roman Catholic Bible, the Old Testament section, you will find two books by the name First Maccabees and Second Maccabees. Now, please understand, these are not the books of the Bible, but you will find them only in the Roman Catholic Bible in the Old Testament. If you go to some of the Protestant Bibles, these two books are clubbed together or with other books of what is known as the Apocrypha, the extra writings. The Protestant canon does not recognize these books as inspired. They are purely historical, and we can refer to those books only to have a historical information. So please understand that. Okay, now I'm going to read from one of those books. I'm going to read from First Maccabees, and you have these names in your supplementary notes. First Maccabees chapter 1. We are not reading a book of the Bible. We are reading a historical book. In chapter 1, verses 59 to 60. I shouldn't tell you the verses because it sounds like Bible. Okay. In chapter 1 of the First Maccabees, there is a record. It says, according to the decree. Now, this is a reference to the decree by King Antiochus Epiphanes. They put to death. So, based on the order given by Antiochus, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families and those who circumcised them. And they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. But many in Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. So, this is an account of the persecution unleashed against the Jews by Antiochus. Please understand and please remember, the section that I read to you is not from the Bible, it is from a historical book. And the information in this history book confirms what we are reading in the Bible. And it also says that when a Greek official, now please remember, Antiochus is Greek. And you may recall that Alexander was Greek. So Antiochus was one of the, he came from one of those four kingdoms that the kingdom of Greece was divided into four, and then from one of those four kingdoms came Antiochus. He was Greek, and therefore most of his officers were Greek. And history says when a Greek official of Antiochus tried to force a priest named Mattathias to make a sacrifice to a pagan god, this priest by the name Mattathias murdered that official. I hope you're following. So a Greek official of King Antiochus forced a priest, a Jewish priest by the name Mattathias, to offer a sacrifice to a pagan god, and he simply did not refuse it, but he turned around and killed that official. Okay, now you can imagine what would have happened after that. Antiochus retaliated and he persecuted the Jews. In 167 BC, the Jews rose up behind this same priest by the name Mattathias and his 5 sons and fought for their liberation. The first book of Maccabees is about the Maccabean revolt. So the first book is actually about what Mattathias and his sons, 5 sons, and then the Jewish army did in order to liberate the Jews from the rule of Antiochus. Okay, this is history. Okay, and you can Google it and you can find out these things. Then Gabriel explained in verse 25, now we are in verse 25, that this king would cleverly use his power to deceive others successfully. He will consider himself to be great and destroy many people when they are not expecting it. And then Gabriel explained that this king, now we know his name, but Gabriel never named that king. In fact, in any of the interpretations we would read in the book of Daniel, I don't think the names of the kings were given. The only name that we have, or the only names actually we have, are the names of Cyrus and then Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar, I think. But when these names were given to Daniel, or when Daniel talks about them, they were not future kings. Daniel talks about them when they were present, or the present kings. And then in verse 25, we have all this information. One is that he would use treachery, or he would use intrigue, and he would deceive others, and also he would consider himself to be God. He will consider himself to be great and destroy the people, and he will oppose the Prince of Princes, but he will be defeated, though not by human power. That means this man, this king, would consider himself to be God. And that's the reason he would defy God, or he will oppose God. The term Prince of Princes refers to Jesus Christ. We will come to that in a minute. I'm going to read from history again. This is not from the book of Maccabees, but another source. It says Antiochus seized control of the high priesthood, and you guys understand who is a high priest in the Jewish religion. So he seized the control of the high priesthood, which resulted in a power struggle between those seeking that office. So this is not the exactly the same high priesthood as we see in the Torah, in the Old Testament books. Many years have passed, and now this has become a political position. And there would be, if you remember, in the book of Matthew, or in I think it's in the book of Gospel of Matthew, there were two high priests. You remember that? Ananias and Caiaphas. There were two, and one was the father-in-law of the other. I don't remember which one is which, but and the reason was one was a real high priest as per the Jewish tradition, and the other one was one appointed by Rome by paying money or something. So there were two, and so this at this point of time, this has become more of a political position, and there was power struggle between two groups, and Antiochus used one of these struggles as an opportunity to subject Jerusalem to a prolonged period of looting and massacre. And therefore, most scholars see these events as the fulfillment of verse 25 of this chapter. Okay, we read in verse 25 that he would oppose the prince of princes. Just want to give you some additional insight, because if you happen to read different commentaries or different books, you will come across different interpretations. The word prince or princess in the Hebrew is sar, S-A-R, and we studied this particular word in our introduction, if you remember. And this particular word may refer to a head person or anyone who is a head or a leader. And it is used elsewhere in scriptures for the captain of the guard or army. It's used for chief jailer. Remember in chapter 1, it was used for the chief of the eunuchs, or it was actually used for the word eunuch. Therefore, now, most scholars believe that this particular word is used for the Lord Jesus Christ. The term Prince of Princes means the Lord of Lords, and I believe that's an accurate interpretation. But I should also give you what others think about it. Many believe, or not many, some believe that in the context of Jewish history, this may refer to Antiochus expelling a godly high priest by the name Onias III. That is spelled O-N-A-I-A-S. O-N-I-A-S. Onias III from the office, and replacing him with his younger brother Jason, who supported the Hellenization of the Jews. But in verse 11 of this chapter, we read that this king took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. So that refers to God. That refers to the Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, I believe when the Bible says the Prince of Princes, it is a direct reference to the Lord Jesus Christ himself, because the sacrifices are made to God, not to a high priest. Even though the high priest is the one who makes it, or other priests are the one who make the sacrifice, it is always made to God. Therefore, I believe it is a reference to Jesus Christ. And besides, it can mean the prince, the Lord of Lords, or it can mean a human leader. But in the context, it has to be, because sacrifices are never made to a human leader. All right, Antiochus then secured control of the high priesthood and forced people to worship him rather than Jehovah. At some point, I told you, he thought he was God, and then he wanted people to worship him. Remember, Alexander at some point thought he was God, and he expected his comrades to prostrate before him. It says, history says, the coins of Antiochus Epiphanes were inscribed with this title, Theos Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. And that's what actually it means. Antiochus is his name, and Epiphanes actually means manifest. And in the coins that were in circulation during his reign had this inscription on it, Theos Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. And I think the Jews, because they did not like him, they did not address him as Antiochus Epiphanes, but they addressed him Antiochus. Then I don't remember the term. It meant actually madman. So that's how they called him. And you can look up in Google. You'll find that word. I forgot. Quick reference of verse 12. In verse 12, Daniel says that this king even challenged the prince of princes by doing two things. One, he halted the daily sacrifice, and then he threw the truth to the ground. Concerning daily sacrifices, you can read the book of Exodus or Numbers. For example, if you go to Numbers chapter 28, you have detailed information about daily sacrifice. So we're not going to go there now. I'm going to read from the first book of Maccabees once again. Again, this is not a book of the Bible. This is history. And the king Antiochus sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the cities of Judah to forbid the burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and feasts. On the 15th day of Kislev, that is a month's name, that's the name of a month, Kislev. On the 15th day of Kislev, in 145th year, he erected a desolating sacrilege upon the altar of burnt offering. So, as I said earlier, Antiochus did not destroy any part of the temple, I mean the physical structure. But the book of Maccabees gives us a list of items that Antiochus stole from the temple, and this includes many things like the golden altar, the table of presentation, the candelabrum, meaning the menorah, and all other vessels, and not to mention the vessels of gold and or any gold item he could find. Then this book of Maccabees also tells us that he erected a statue of Zeus. I think that, did I mention that earlier? He erected a statue of Zeus in the temple and offered a pig as a sacrifice to Zeus on the altar meant for God. And whether Antiochus fulfilled this detail in the vision of Daniel depends on how we interpret the word threw down. And the Hebrew word used here can mean to throw out, or to throw down, or to throw away, literally or figuratively. That's additional information for you. And from the book of Maccabees, we have additional information that the temple was reconsecrated and rededicated by Judas Maccabees on the 25th of Kislev in 164 BC. And since that day, they began to celebrate a festival by the name the Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah in the Hebrew language. And we also learned that from Daniel's description that the king threw the truth to the ground. And we know that the law of God represented the truth of God. So again, from history, we have this information that the books of the law which they found, this is the people or the officials of Antiochus, they tore to pieces and burned with fire. So we're talking about the Bible of that time, the Old Testament books. Where the book of the covenant was found in the possession of anyone, or if anyone adhered to the law, that is Torah, the decree of the king was to kill them. Now we'll go to verse 24, because that's where we have the interpretation of this particular king, or some more information as given by Gabriel about this king. In verse 24, Gabriel told Daniel that this king would be a fierce king, and he would become very strong, but not by his own power. So this is a king, a fierce king, a man of intrigue, but and he would become very powerful, but or very strong, but not by his own power. And I believe what Gabriel meant was that he would get his strength from a supernatural source, which is not God, of course. And what I believe is that he was operating under the influence of Satan. And why do I say that? Because he was totally opposed to the people of God. And of course, God had allowed this because of the unfaithfulness of his own people. Now, when you read history, no historical record would say that Antiochus Epiphanes was empowered by Satan. But when you look at his aggression against the Jewish people, it becomes very clear that the source of his power was Satan. And we know this from other scriptural records and also from history, that in history they won't say Satan, but we can compare the historical records with the information available in the Bible and see that Satan, knowing that the promised seed would come through the Jews, has historically sought to eradicate the Jewish people. And in verse 24, Gabriel further explained that this king would cause a shocking amount of destruction and succeed in everything he would do. And according to the information we have available from history, Antiochus killed approximately 80,000 Jews and sold another 40,000 into slavery. Now, we are talking about the Jews, 80,000 plus 40,000. But we do not have the number of non-Jews killed by Antiochus as he was expanding his kingdom. But in Gabriel, the angel, gave an assurance to Daniel that his power, that is Antiochus Epiphanes, Epiphanes' power would be broken, but not by human, again, not by human power. And there are various accounts of Antiochus' death, but most of them agree that he was struck by a sudden fatal illness. And according to Josephus, a Jewish historian, and also from the books of the Apocrypha, we have information that Antiochus fell from his chariot and was bedridden for several days. And Josephus says that he died imploring Jehovah to spare his life. But again, these are historical information, not from the Bible. Isn't it amazing that God would give so accurate information to one person because he represented the people, God's chosen people. And this chapter, or the information we have covered so far, compels me to believe that God would do the same for us today. And even though we are no longer a political nation as Israel was, but we are a nation, meaning ethnic group. So for Israel, they were both an ethnic group as well as a political nation, or a country, as we call today. We as Christians do not belong to one particular country, but we live in different countries. But in God's eyes, we are just one ethnic group, God's church, or Church of God. And I believe God would, when needed, give us the information we need about our church or our city or our country. And if God would give so precise information about the future, because this was needed for Israel, again, we need to remember that this information came to Daniel when the Jewish people were still in Babylonian captivity. If you remember, this vision occurred during the third year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylonia. So God, in His mercy, showed, and I think in our last session also we talked about it, in His mercy and love for His people, showed them in advance what would happen in the future, including the persecution that His own people will go through because of their unfaithfulness to Him. They were in captivity in Babylon at this particular time, or in this particular age, when Daniel was seeing this vision, because of their unfaithfulness to God. And God promised that they would go back to their own land or homeland when they complete 70 years. But since God knows the entire future, He said, but a time will come, there will be great persecution over the Jews because of their unfaithfulness. And this happened in history. And we will talk about the other two verses or three verses, 25, 26, and 27, and then conclude this chapter. So I think this is a good place to stop, unless you have any questions to ask. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and God bless you. You guys have a great evening.